The first person on our video is Willie Francis, whose case is both highly notable and deeply disturbing. Born in 1929 in the state of Louisiana, Francis was a young African-American man who, at the age of 16, received the death penalty. Francis was known to lead a quiet, ordinary life until a series of unfortunate events brought his name to public attention. He was convicted in 1945 for the murder of Andrew Thomas, a local pharmacist. The trial was fraught with problems, including questionable evidence, alleged forced confessions, and a lack of adequate legal representation. Francis was reportedly chosen from a lineup of potential suspects by the local police, based on dubious evidence and racial bias. The verdict was swift, and Francis was sentenced to death by electrocution. In a chilling turn of events, the electric chair failed to execute Francis on the first attempt due to a technical mishap. This led to a protracted legal battle, arguing that a second attempt would be cruel and unusual punishment. The argument, however, was not successful, and Francis was executed on the second attempt in 1947, when he was just 18 years old. This unfortunate event made him one of the youngest individuals to be executed in the United States. Despite the grim nature of his story, Willie Francis's case helped ignite a public debate around the application of the death penalty, particularly for juvenile offenders. Questions about racial bias, inadequate legal representation, and the morality of capital punishment were raised. These discussions would ultimately lead to significant changes in how the justice system in the U.S. handles such cases. Francis's case also brought forward conversations about the ethical implications of the death penalty and the associated procedures. The issue of the botched execution led to discourse about the humanity, or lack thereof, within the capital punishment system. It led to considerations about the methods of execution and inspired legal debates about what constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. Number 2. Scott Hayne. Scott Hayne was another notable figure in the realm of capital punishment, sentenced to death for a crime committed as a minor. Born in 1971 in Oklahoma, Hayne received his death sentence at the age of 17. His story further brings into focus the controversies around juvenile executions and the intricacies of the American justice system. In 1987, Hayne, together with Robert Lambert, committed a violent crime resulting in the death of 2 people. The case revolved around an episode of carjacking, which ended tragically when the victims were locked in the trunk of their car and set on fire. Hayne and Lambert were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Their trial and conviction received widespread attention, sparking debates about the morality and legality of issuing the death sentence to underage offenders. Hayne was sentenced to death, while Lambert received life without parole. This stark difference in their sentences, despite both being involved in the crime, brought up questions about sentencing disparities and the fairness of the legal system. In the subsequent years, Hayne's legal team launched several appeals, all focusing on one central argument: the unconstitutionality of executing someone for a crime they committed as a minor. The appeals reached the United States Supreme Court, which led to the examination of the international norms and treaties related to juvenile executions. However, these efforts proved fruitless, as the court upheld Hayne's sentence. The argument was that Hayne's age at the time of the crime did not excuse the severity of the act. He was executed in 2003, making him one of the last individuals in the United States to be executed for a crime committed as a minor. The story of Scott Hayne has added to the ongoing discourse about the application of the death penalty, especially concerning juveniles. It highlights the questions about whether or not young people, whose cognitive abilities and judgment are not fully developed, should be held to the same legal standards and punishments as adults. It further brings into light the disparity in sentencing even among co-defendants, raising questions about the fairness and consistency of the justice system. Moreover, Hayne's case played a crucial role in raising awareness about international norms and treaties regarding juvenile executions. It prompted discussions on whether or not the U.S. should align its practices with these standards. While the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against Hayne, the case significantly contributed to the court's decision to ban capital punishment for crimes committed by individuals under the age of 18 in 2005. Number 3. George Stinney. The story of George Stinney stands as one of the most unsettling examples of the use of capital punishment for juvenile offenders. Born in 1929, Stinney was an African-American boy from South Carolina, and he remains the youngest person ever executed in the United States in the 20th century. In 1944, when Stinney was just 14 years old, he was accused of the murder of two young white girls. The evidence was circumstantial at best, but the racially charged climate of the time played a significant role in the subsequent events. Stinney was arrested, tried, convicted, and sentenced to death, all within a span of about 3 months. The trial was fraught with issues. Stinney had no effective legal representation, and the all-white jury reached a guilty verdict in just 10 minutes. There was no physical evidence linking him to the crime, and the confession he allegedly gave was under duress and without parental or legal counsel present. Stinney was executed by electric chair in June 1944, a mere 83 days after the crime was committed. His small stature, highlighting his youth, only amplified the controversy surrounding his execution. It served as a stark reminder of the harsh reality of capital punishment when applied to a child. The case of George Stinney has had a lasting impact on the discourse around race, justice, and capital punishment in the United States. It has been widely cited as a stark example of the racial bias that pervaded the justice system, particularly in the South, during the mid-20th century. In 2014, nearly 70 years after his execution, Stinney's conviction was posthumously vacated. A South Carolina judge ruled that he had not been given a fair trial, as he was denied due process rights, effective counsel, and his confession was likely coerced. The ruling served as a form of belated justice, acknowledging the grave injustice that had been done. Stinney's story, while tragic, has contributed to the ongoing conversation about racial bias in the justice system and the appropriateness of capital punishment for juvenile offenders. It has highlighted the importance of effective legal representation and the necessity of ensuring due process rights for all, regardless of age or race. Number 4. Paula Cooper. Paula Cooper, born in 1969, was an Indiana teen whose case sparked international outcry and prompted wide-ranging debates about the application of the death penalty to minors. At the age of 15, Cooper was sentenced to death for a crime committed in 1985, making her one of the youngest girls ever to be sentenced to death in the United States. Cooper was convicted of the murder of Ruth Pelk, a 78-year-old Bible study teacher. The crime was linked to a robbery attempt that turned deadly. Although Cooper confessed to the crime, her age and the severity of the punishment generated a vast amount of controversy. The sentencing of such a young individual to death led to a global campaign to spare her life. Pope John Paul II, the European Parliament, and an international human rights organization were among the voices advocating for her sentence to be commuted. More than 2 million signatures were collected in a petition to Indiana's governor pleading for clemency for Cooper. The efforts were not in vain. In 1989, the Indiana Supreme Court commuted Cooper's death sentence to a 60-year prison term, citing her age at the time of the crime as a key factor. Cooper, while incarcerated, made efforts to reform her life. She earned her GED and studied for a college degree. She also expressed deep remorse for her actions. Cooper was released from prison in 2013 after serving 27 years. Tragically, she committed suicide just 2 years after her release, a testament to the lasting psychological impact of her experiences. The case of Paula Cooper has played a significant role in the dialogue around juvenile justice and capital punishment. It has shed light on the potential for rehabilitation of young offenders and raised questions about whether the severity of the crime should always determine the severity of the punishment, particularly in cases involving minors. Furthermore, Cooper's case helped galvanize international efforts to stop juvenile executions and shone a light on the global perspectives and norms on this issue. It highlighted the need for alternative strategies in dealing with juvenile offenders, emphasizing rehabilitation and reform over retribution. Cooper's story also underscores the long-term mental health consequences that such severe punishments can have on young offenders. The tragic end to her life, despite her attempts at reform and reintegration into society, raises questions about the support systems available to individuals like her upon release. Number 5. Leon Brown. Leon Brown's case stands as a stark reminder of the potential for grave errors within the justice system, particularly when it involves young and vulnerable defendants. Born in 1968 in North Carolina, Brown was convicted alongside his half-brother Henry McCollum for a rape and murder committed in 1983. Brown was only 15 years old at the time of the crime. Despite significant inconsistencies in their confessions and a lack of physical evidence linking them to the crime, both Brown and McCollum were sentenced to death in 1984. Their trials were marred with issues, from dubious interrogations tactics to alleged misconduct during the trial. The case was the subject of intense debate, largely due to the age of the defendants and their cognitive abilities. Both Brown and McCollum had intellectual disabilities, which raised questions about their ability to fully understand their legal rights or the gravity of the confessions they had given. However, it wasn't until 30 years later, in 2014, that new DNA evidence emerged, pointing to a different suspect entirely. This evidence led to the exoneration and release of both Brown and McCollum in one of the most high-profile wrongful conviction cases in the United States. This case brought to the forefront the potential fallibility of the justice system, especially when dealing with young, intellectually disabled individuals. It prompted discussions about the interrogation and confession procedures used by law enforcement and how they can be manipulated or misunderstood by vulnerable individuals. Furthermore, the case raised questions about the use of the death penalty, particularly in cases with such high potential for error. It emphasized the irreversible nature of capital punishment and the devastating impact a wrongful conviction can have on the lives of innocent individuals. The Brown-McCollum case also contributed to the ongoing discussions about criminal justice reform, particularly the use of DNA testing in post-conviction investigations. The fact that such testing was able to exonerate Brown and McCollum underscored its importance in ensuring justice. Leon Brown's story serves as a sobering reminder of the potential for wrongful convictions, particularly in capital cases. It demonstrates the need for comprehensive legal representation, especially for the most vulnerable defendants. It also emphasizes the importance of technological and scientific advancements, such as DNA testing, in ensuring the integrity of the justice system. Number 6. Shanda Scherer's killers. The murder of Shanda Scherer in 1992 sent shockwaves across the United States, drawing national attention to the town of Madison, Indiana. 4 teenage girls, Melinda Loveless, Lori Tackett, Hope Rippey, and Toni Lawrence, were charged and convicted of the horrific crime, which involved kidnap and murder. At the time of the crime, the girls were between the ages of 15 and 17. Loveless, identified as the ringleader, was driven by jealousy, as she believed that Scherer had stolen her ex-girlfriend. Along with her accomplices, Loveless orchestrated a chilling crime that stunned the nation. Although none of the girls received a death sentence, their cases sparked significant controversy and discussion about the justice system's handling of juvenile offenders. Their trials took place in an emotionally charged atmosphere, with each defendant's legal team offering different strategies and defenses. Factors such as peer pressure, fear, and even the influence of cult-like behavior were presented as explanations for their participation in the crime. The sentences for the 4 girls varied widely. Loveless and Tackett received 60-year sentences, while Rippey received a 35-year sentence, and Lawrence, who had minor involvement and turned herself in, received a 20-year sentence. These sentences reflected the different degrees of their participation in the crime. The case of Shanda Scherer's killers underscores the complexities involved in trying and sentencing juvenile offenders. The age of the girls and the gruesome nature of their crime presented a challenging dichotomy. How does the justice system balance the need for punishment and accountability with the understanding that these were children? The case also highlighted the potential influence of environmental factors on juvenile behavior. Loveless, for example, came from a background of severe abuse, which some argue may have contributed to her violent behavior. This raises questions about the role of the community, the school system, and the family in preventing such tragedies. Moreover, the variation in the girls' sentences brings to light the need for individualized justice. Despite their collective involvement in the crime, each girl played a different role and had unique circumstances that impacted their actions. This demonstrates the importance of considering these individual factors when determining sentences. The story of Shandas Scherer's killers continues to contribute to discussions about the nature of juvenile crime and the justice system's response to it. It serves as a reminder of the potential for violence among young people and the need for early intervention and support to prevent such tragedies. It also prompts consideration of the factors that contribute to juvenile crime and how these can be addressed to prevent future incidents. Number 7. Thomas Granger. Stepping far back into the annals of American history, we encounter the case of Thomas Granger, the first recorded instance of a juvenile being executed in the American colonies. His case is significant not just for the fact that Granger was a teenager at the time of his crime in the 17th century, but also because of the nature of the crime and the subsequent punishment. Granger, born in the early 1620s in Plymouth Colony, what is now present-day Massachusetts, was convicted of a crime that is relatively rare in the modern era: bestiality. His crime and the severity of his punishment must be viewed through the lens of the time and culture in which they occurred. The Puritan community had strict religious and moral codes, and his crime was considered an affront to these. In 1642, Granger was charged, tried, and found guilty. Given the gravity of his offense in the eyes of the community, he was sentenced to death. The mode of execution was hanging, a common form of capital punishment during this period. Historical records indicate that before his execution, Granger confessed to his crime, and all the animals involved were also put to death, in keeping with the biblical laws that the Puritans followed. His execution was seen as a stern warning against immoral behavior in the Puritan society. Granger's case underscores how societal norms and values shaped the application of justice. It also highlights the shifts in these norms over time, as what was considered an offense punishable by death in the 17th century is not viewed in the same light today. The story of Thomas Granger serves as a historical marker in the discourse around juvenile justice and capital punishment. It emphasizes the changes in societal attitudes towards crime, punishment, and the treatment of young offenders. Moreover, Granger's case raises questions about the appropriateness of capital punishment for juveniles, given their developmental stage and capacity for change and rehabilitation. While Granger's crime may seem relatively mild compared to some modern offenses, the severity of his punishment draws attention to the ongoing debates about the appropriate punishment for juvenile offenders. While the world has evolved significantly since Granger's time, his story continues to contribute to conversations about juvenile justice and capital punishment. It serves as a historical point of reference, illustrating how societal values, norms, and laws have transformed over centuries. Despite the vast differences in context and culture, the story of Thomas Granger underscores the enduring issues at the heart of these debates: fairness, morality, and the balance between punishment and rehabilitation. Number 8. José Raúl Villafuerte. In our exploration of the youngest individuals to face death row, we turn to the case of José Raúl Villafuerte. Born in 1959 in El Salvador, Villafuerte would eventually find himself on death row in the United States, the result of a deeply tragic series of events that began in his early childhood and culminated in a crime committed when he was just 16 years old. Villafuerte's life was marked by hardship and violence from a young age. He witnessed his father murder his mother when he was only 5 years old and was subsequently sent to live with an aunt who subjected him to physical abuse. He fled El Salvador as a teenager during the Civil War, eventually ending up in the United States. However, life in the U.S. brought new challenges. Unable to speak English and lacking formal education, Villafuerte found himself living on the streets of Los Angeles. In 1976, he was convicted of a fatal stabbing, a crime committed when he was only 16. Despite his age, he was tried as an adult and sentenced to death. Villafuerte's case highlights the complex factors that can contribute to juvenile crime, including trauma, dislocation, and socioeconomic hardship. It also draws attention to the challenges faced by young immigrants, who may find themselves adrift in a foreign culture without sufficient support or resources. Furthermore, the decision to try Villafuerte as an adult raises questions about how the justice system determines culpability and punishment. Despite his young age and traumatic background, Villafuerte received the harshest punishment possible. This decision contributed to ongoing debates about whether juveniles should be tried as adults and whether the death penalty is an appropriate sentence for young offenders. While on death row, Villafuerte became a painter, a practice he claimed helped him cope with his circumstances. His artwork was exhibited in various venues, bringing attention to his case and the broader issues surrounding juvenile justice and capital punishment. In 1981, Villafuerte's death sentence was overturned by the California Supreme Court, citing an error in the jury instructions at his trial. He was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He continues to serve his sentence and to create artwork from within prison walls. Number 9. Sean Sellers. The case of Sean Sellers is one that provoked profound reflection on the application of capital punishment to juvenile offenders. Sellers, born in 1969 in California, became one of the youngest individuals in the United States to receive a death sentence in the modern era. His crime, committed when he was just 16 years old, was the murder of his mother, stepfather, and a convenience store clerk in Oklahoma. The Sellers case was marked by numerous complex factors, including Sellers' young age, his troubled mental health history, and his involvement with the occult. His legal team argued that Sellers suffered from multiple personality disorder, which they claimed contributed to his violent behavior. His case provoked widespread debate, raising questions about the ethics of executing someone for a crime committed as a juvenile. The American public was split, with some seeing Sellers as a remorseless killer deserving of his sentence, while others viewed him as a troubled child who should not be subject to the ultimate punishment. While in prison, Sellers underwent a religious conversion and expressed deep remorse for his actions. He spent the rest of his life advocating against violence and the death penalty, becoming a prominent voice in discussions on juvenile justice and capital punishment. Despite his appeals and the controversy surrounding his case, Sellers' death sentence was upheld. He was executed in 1999 at the age of 29, making him the first person in the United States to be executed for a crime committed under the age of 17 since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. The case of Sean Sellers presents a complex portrait of a young man whose actions were undeniably horrific, yet whose personal circumstances and mental health challenges complicate the narrative. His story forces us to grapple with difficult questions about the nature of justice, the capacity for redemption, and the ethics of the death penalty, particularly when applied to juvenile offenders. Number 10. Michael Dominguez. In the landscape of juvenile justice and capital punishment, few cases have had as significant an impact as that of Michael Dominguez. Born in 1975 in Nevada, Dominguez was convicted and sentenced to death at just 16 years old for a double murder, making him one of the youngest individuals to ever receive the death penalty in the United States. Dominguez's case unfolded in the early 1990s, when he was charged with the murder of his 24-year-old neighbor and her 4-year-old son in Las Vegas. Despite his young age and the potential mitigating circumstances related to his upbringing, the severity of his crime led the court to try him as an adult. The case of Michael Dominguez caught national and even international attention due to the vigorous appeals process that followed his conviction. Dominguez's legal team argued that executing someone for a crime committed as a juvenile violated international law, specifically the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, both of which prohibit such executions. However, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to review the case, and the international legal argument failed to save Dominguez from death row. Nevertheless, his case underscored the tensions between U.S. and international standards regarding the death penalty for juvenile offenders. In a twist of fate, while Dominguez was on death row, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 2005 in the case of Roper v. Simmons that the execution of offenders for crimes committed before the age of 18 is unconstitutional. This landmark ruling effectively saved Dominguez from execution, but not from spending the rest of his life in prison. Michael Dominguez's case highlights the complexities of sentencing juveniles to death and the evolving attitudes towards this practice. It raises questions about the appropriate age of criminal responsibility and the balance between holding young offenders accountable for their actions and acknowledging their potential for rehabilitation.